Dickens more than just a writer, Charles Dickens. A name synonymous with Victorian England, Christmas ghosts and really long sentences, but Dickens was more than just a writer of cracking good yarns. He was a social reformer, a journalist, a political commentator, and even dabbled in a bit of amateur medicine. This wasn't just a man with a way with words, he was a man on a mission. Dickens used his platform to expose the underbelly of Victorian society, shining a light on the plight of the poor and the injustices of his time. Think of him as the Victorian Banksy, but with fewer stencils and more top hats. He held a mirror up to society, forcing people to confront the uncomfortable truths lurking beneath the surface of their seemingly civilized world. And like any good writer worth his salt, he did it with wit, humor, and a healthy dose of social commentary. Dickens wasn't content to simply entertain his readers. He wanted to shake them, to make them think, to make them. He wanted to change the world, one sentence, one character, one story at a time. And you know what? He pretty much did. Now, Victorian London wasn't all sunshine and roses. Imagine a city choked by smog, where poverty clung to the cobblestone streets like a bad smell. This was the world Dickens knew, the world he grew up in, and the world he wrote about with unflinching honesty. He knew what it was like to be poor, to be hungry, to be forgotten. He'd experienced the sting of debtor's prison firsthand when his father was incarcerated for unpaid debts. Young Charles, just a lad of 12, was forced to leave school and work in a blacking factory, pasting labels on bottles of boot polish. Talk about a rude awakening. This experience left an indelible mark on Dickens, shaping his worldview and fueling his desire to expose the injustices faced by the most vulnerable members of society. He believed everyone deserved a decent life, regardless of their social standing, and he wasn't afraid to shout about it. Dickens's writing was like a punch to the gut, in a good way, of course. He had this uncanny ability to capture the essence of human nature, both the good and the bad, with such vivid detail that you couldn't help but be drawn into his world. His characters, from the tragic to the comic, were so real, so relatable, that they practically leapt off the page. He wrote about things people didn't want to talk about: poverty, child labor, the failings of the legal system, the hypocrisy of the upper classes. But he didn't just point fingers and preach. He wove these issues into compelling stories, filled with humor, pathos, and unforgettable characters that resonated with readers from all walks of life. He was a master of language, using satire, irony, and even a bit of melodrama to get his point across. He could make you laugh one minute and break your heart the next. And he always left you with something to think about long after you'd finished reading. Dickens wasn't just a novelist. Oh no, he was a journalist too. A right proper newshound, in fact. He started his career as a parliamentary reporter, which gave him a front row seat to the political shenanigans of the day. He saw firsthand how the sausage was made, so to speak, and he wasn't afraid to share his observations with the world. He wrote for several newspapers and magazines, covering everything from politics to crime to social issues. He even founded his own weekly journal, Household Words, which became a platform for his own writing and that of other like-minded authors. Dickens used his journalism to campaign for social change, highlighting issues such as poverty, education, and sanitation. He believed in the power of the press to hold those in power accountable and to give a voice to the voiceless. And he used his voice, both in his novels and his journalism, to fight for a better world. Dickens The Diagnostician, A Prescription for Change. Now, this might surprise you, but Dickens was also a bit of an armchair physician. He was fascinated by medicine and its impact on society. He even witnessed surgery performed without anesthesia, which, let's be honest, would make anyone a bit squeamish. He was particularly interested in the treatment of mental illness, which was often misunderstood and stigmatized at the time. He visited asylums and wrote about the plight of the mentally ill, advocating for more humane treatment and better facilities. Dickens even coined medical terms like obsessive-compulsive disorder, which he described in detail in his novel Bleak House. He may not have had a medical degree, but he had a keen eye for observation and a deep empathy for those who were suffering. He used his writing to raise awareness about mental health issues and to challenge the prevailing attitudes of the time. the boy who lived to tell the tale. Charles Dickens's life story is a bit of a fairy tale, but with a healthy dose of grit and determination thrown in. Born in Portsmouth in 1812, he was one of 8 children. His father was a clerk in the Navy Pay Office, which sounds grander than it was. They were comfortable, but not exactly rolling in it. Then came the aforementioned debtor's prison episode, which was a real kick in the teeth for young Charles. He had to leave school, work in a factory, and basically grow up overnight. Talk about a crash course in the school of hard knocks. But Dickens was a survivor. He educated himself, reading everything he could get his hands on. He worked his way up from a lowly clerk to a court reporter, honing his writing skills along the way, and then, bam, he hit the literary jackpot with the Pickwick Papers and became the Beyoncé of his day. Oliver Twist, begging for more than Gruel. Oliver Twist, one of Dickens' most famous works, wasn't just a ripping good yarn, it was a scathing indictment of the workhouse system. Imagine being an orphan in Victorian England. Not exactly a picnic, was it? You'd likely end up in a workhouse, which was basically a prison for the poor. Dickens knew this world all too well, and he didn't sugarcoat it. He exposed the cruelty, the neglect, the sheer inhumanity of a system that treated the poor as burdens rather than human beings. Remember that iconic line, "Please, sir, I want some more"? It wasn't just about Gruel, it was a cry for help, a desperate plea for dignity and compassion in a world that seemed determined to grind the poor under its heel. Hard times, no laughing matter. In Hard Times, Dickens turned his attention to the Industrial Revolution and its impact on the working class. He took aim at the dehumanizing effects of factory work, the rigid social hierarchy, and the utilitarian philosophy that valued profit over people. He created characters like Thomas Gradgrind, a factory owner so obsessed with facts and figures that he'd forgotten what it meant to be human. And then there was Sissy Jupe, a working-class girl whose compassion and imagination stood in stark contrast to the cold, calculating world of the factory owners. Dickens wasn't against progress, but he believed that progress without compassion was no progress at all. He wanted a world where people weren't just cogs in a machine, but valued members of society. Bleak House, where the law gets lost. Bleak House is Dickens at his most satirical, taking on the legal system and its labyrinthine bureaucracy. He skewers the lawyers, the judges, the whole legal circus with his trademark wit and biting social commentary. The novel revolves around a seemingly never-ending court case, Jarndyce and Jarndyce, which drags on for generations, consuming lives and fortunes along the way. It's a metaphor for the way the legal system can trap people in a web of red tape and legalese, often leaving them worse off than when they started. Dickens, ever the champion of the underdog, uses Bleak House to expose the injustices of a system that often favored the wealthy and powerful at the expense of the poor and vulnerable. And Great Expectations, more than just a pretty penny. Great Expectations is a coming-of-age story about Pip, an orphan who dreams of a better life. But it's also a cautionary tale about the dangers of social climbing and the corrosive nature of greed. Pip is given a mysterious fortune and whisked away to London to become a gentleman. But his newfound wealth and status come at a price as he becomes ashamed of his humble beginnings and the people who love him. Dickens reminds us that true happiness isn't about money or social status, but about kindness, compassion, and staying true to yourself. Dickens's legacy, still making a difference. Charles Dickens may have died in 1870, but his words continue to resonate with readers today. His novels are still studied in schools, adapted for stage and screen, and debated in literary circles. Why? Because Dickens tapped into something universal, something timeless. He wrote about the human condition, about the struggles and triumphs of ordinary people trying to navigate a complex and often unfair world. His work sparked social change, raising awareness about poverty, inequality, and injustice. He inspired countless writers, artists, and activists to use their voices to make the world a better place. And his legacy continues to inspire us today, reminding us that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, always compassion, and always the power of words to make a difference. Thank you for watching.